council to order. Will the clerk please call the roll? I'm here.
Councilmember Alford, present. Councilmember Clay. Councilmember Williams. Councilmember Seaman.
Councilmember Williams.
Well, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Councilmember Seaman.
Present.
Councilmember Elrich. And Councilmember Berry.
Councilmember Clay won't be joining us this evening. She's apparently not feeling well. I assume that the other two will be here. I haven't heard from them. Are there any council comments or announcements? Bruce?
Two things. I just wanted to briefly note that a couple of us went to the Maryland Municipal League Legislative Conference. The mayor was there, Councilmember Clay, City Manager Matthews, and Council and Government Liaison Ludlow. The item that I believe you all discussed last week that was the extra agenda item after I left because I wasn't feeling well was about the possibility of adding the legislative priorities, and the end result of a fairly complicated process was that one of the two got added, which was municipalities acting as electricity aggregators. So that one is back on the league's priority list for the upcoming legislative session in Annapolis. And then I just wanted to note the sessions that I went to. I will say that I think this was one of the better legislative conferences that I've been to. There were some interesting sessions. There was one on economic development opportunities, and their people from the state made it fairly clear that if we wanted to ask for some money for writing a strategic plan for economic development, that there was money available. The new immigrants in your community, we learned a lot about the shortcomings of the federal immigration policy. I know I learned many instances of why it doesn't work. We got a lot of information and heard from the former mayor of Herndon about his experience with day labor sites and Minutemen, and one of the panelists was Kim Propriak of Casa de Maryland. And finally, I attended a session on GASB 43 and 45, which is about other post-employment benefits, which is all not about pensions, but about setting aside money for health insurance costs for retirees. And I talked with the city manager about whether we might have any possible exposure on that, and it sounds like we probably don't, because we don't pay for health insurance for retirees, but there may be some ways that they want to try and make us liable for something. And that'll be upcoming in about 2 years.
Yes, if I may, as Councilmember Williams indicated, we do not pay for health insurance benefits for city retirees, but they are allowed to stay on our plans. There is a school of thought that basically by allowing people who are no longer our employees to be on the plans, that they're receiving essentially an implied subsidy, because the rates they get and pay through the city's group plan are probably much more beneficial than they would be otherwise. So in talking to our auditors, they've indicated that that's probably viewed as an implied subsidy, and that the city would likely need to retain an actuary to try to calculate what the value of that implied subsidy is. My understanding is that this will, if we are subject to it, it would go into effect for the general purpose financial statements for fiscal 09. So we still have a couple years, but we do need to be getting some clarification from our auditors in terms of how this will be applied to the city and how exactly that implied subsidy would be calculated.
It may be 08 rather than 09. I sat through the same, or most of the same discussion, Bruce.
You got frozen out.
Oh, I was sitting under an air conditioning vent, and when my hands got too frozen for me to continue to write notes anymore, I left. But my understanding was that it was phased in 07, 08, and 09, and if that's the case, we would be in 08, because I think it's over 10,000 for 8.
Yeah, and talking to our auditors, they believed it was 09, but we can verify that.
Yeah, we should check, but we're definitely not in the first group. That's the big cities.
Right.
And the folks who were giving the presentation said, it's a good thing you're not, because they're the people who are going to run into all the problems.
And then I just had one other thing. I was hoping that city manager could have staff look at a situation that I noticed on the weekend, which is that I know that companies that have newspaper boxes are allowed to have them in the right-of-way, but I noticed that one in Tacoma Junction on Carroll Avenue, backing up to B.Y. Morrison Park, there's one of them that's tied to a ride-on pole, and the way it's situated, the only place it can sit is in the sidewalk. No, there's no possibility of swinging it around to the other side of the pole because there's a wall behind there, and consequently, it makes that section of sidewalk only 2 feet wide, and anybody in a wheelchair or with a stroller would not be able to get through, and it's right by a bus stop. So if we can do whatever we need to do to either us move it or them move it, I think that would be good.
We'll be happy to check it out.
Thanks.
Anything else? Joy?
I have a couple things to report to the council. One is something you know is my membership on the Washington Metropolitan Air Quality Committee. We had a town hall meeting last week, and it was a very interesting time to present what the action plan is and the progress we've made on improving air quality in our region, and get feedback from people from that came to find out what their concerns were and where they'd like to see things go for the next year. I also want to bring to your attention that I was recently appointed to the Montgomery Cares Program Advisory Committee, and that is a county function that is providing some recommendations to the county executive on implementing the Montgomery Cares Program. They've set a goal of trying to provide primary care to 40,000 county residents who are currently uninsured by 2010. So it's a big job, but have a lot of really good people on the committee, and I'm happy that I was appointed to that. We've had one meeting, and the program director has just been hired, and we have another meeting coming up this week. So if there are any concerns that you have or any particular interests that you would like me to keep you informed of, please feel free to let me know.
Thank you, Mayor Porter. I just wanted to mention that I had an opportunity to talk with a group called Liberty's Promise, which provides support services for teenage new immigrants to the United States. And so I thought it was impressive, the work that they're doing and finding jobs for them, intern jobs, and also providing support with acclimating themselves to the American customs. And so I'd be interested in helping people get in contact with the group if any new immigrants with young children would like information. It's called Liberty's Promise, and I didn't bring their number with me tonight, but you can call me at 301-565-0190. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to add, I was also at the MML legislative conference, and wanted to just add a couple of things to the very good report that Bruce gave. The workshop on issues involving new immigrants was a very good workshop. It was very well attended, but they tried to cover a huge amount of material, and I went up to the staff afterwards and suggested that at the summer conference that they break it up into a series of workshops, and of course the response was what you would expect. They said, how would you like to help organize that? And I said I would do that. So I may be calling on people to help me sort of bring people in for some of the workshops at the summer meeting. The other thing is, during the fall conference was the first meeting of the Maryland Municipal League Legislative Committee's Subcommittee on Municipal Revenues. This is the group that was organized at the recommendation of the Strategic Planning Subcommittee that I chaired. I got to sit in on part of the meeting, not all of it, because it was scheduled to conflict with the mayor's meeting. But the part that I sat through, there was a very interesting discussion of, you'll never guess, tax duplication rebates. And there are a number of municipalities who are getting very interested in this issue. Many of them are in an even worse shape than we are. Some of the counties in Maryland have legislation that says they may, not they shall, but they may pay tax duplication rebates. And in those counties, municipalities can't even get a dime I mean, they may, but of course they don't. And so there is a sort of a group of municipalities who are wanting to work on all of these issues. And I think the first thing that they may try and address is bringing at least all municipalities in Maryland into the same legal standing. And that would also be helpful because it would bring more people to lobby on the kinds of things that we're concerned about.
Unless we become a May.
No, Montgomery County is, there's also other issues with different counties in Maryland, but Montgomery County is pretty firmly a shall. Unfortunately, it doesn't say how much they shall. It says they shall, and presumably if they gave us $1, they would fulfill the law, at least in its technical sense. So there is a lot of things going on at MML that could be very useful, and I think Tacoma Park had quite an impact on some of the things that happened at the fall conference, and they turned out the way we wanted them to. So I think it was quite successful. This is the fourth Monday. We generally have 4 council meetings a week. Occasionally, there's a 5th Monday council meeting, but as the 5th Monday is backing up to Halloween, we were not planning to have one for this coming week. So you all get a day off as well as the rest of the council does.
Can I just add, since we are not meeting next week, that I hope everyone has a fun and safe Halloween. And in case you're interested, I just saw today an ad for a neat play at the Roundhouse Theater. It's Frankenstein, and it's a one-man, one-musician show, and the man who's doing it is Liz Lerman's husband. So it's supposed to be very interesting, and it runs until November 12th.
Okay, thank you. The next item is noting for the record that there's a couple of proclamations that I've done since the last formal meeting we had. One on Pastoral Care Week is commending the members of the Pastoral Care Department of Washington Adventist Hospital as they celebrate Pastoral Care Week from October 23rd to 27th. The other is noting Energy Awareness Month and the Energy Star Change a Light program, which encourages the citizens of Tacoma Park to change a regular light or several regular light bulbs for fluorescent bulbs to reduce the amount of energy used in greenhouse gas emissions. And if I'm November, and it also proclaims November 2006 as Energy Awareness Month in Tacoma Park. So those are 2 things that have come up since our last regular meeting. I only had a chance to look at the first of the set of minutes, the one that was in our packet. I don't know if other council members have had.
I didn't get any.
You didn't get any? The minutes for for September 18th were in our packet.
Not in mine.
Not in yours? What do you want to do? Do you want to
I looked at all of them and submitted changes to Jessie,
Well,
including the one she emailed last night.
yeah, I didn't have a chance to look at the ones that were emailed, but I had a copy of one in my packet. So since Councilmember Williams has not had a chance to look at it, I know he likes to go over them and does a very good job of going over them. Maybe we will postpone the minutes until our next meeting, if you'd like that. I still have one change, though. All right. The next item on the agenda is the public comment period. This is the time set aside on the agenda for comments and not on our regular meeting agenda. That would include our items on our work session agenda or anything else you'd like to bring in front of the council. Would ask when you come to the podium that you identify yourself and please keep your comments brief. There's a little light on the podium that will show you when 3 minutes has elapsed, and I'll let you know, Pat.
Yeah, my name is Pat Lovelace, 7620 Maple Avenue in Tacoma Park, Maryland. Somebody was asking me, since, Halloween is coming up, is the city going to be having a party where kids can go, instead of doing their dangerous act called trick-or-treating? And also, are they going to be having any place like the police station or the hospital where candy can be checked out for toxins or razor blades or anything? Because we know we got a lot of crazy idiots out there nowadays who will take advantage and prey on children every chance they get. Are they going to be having any alternative things where the kids can enjoy themselves? And also, if kids wanted to go trick-or-treating or whatever, do they have a safety packet that could be passed out at the library or the schools or anything, where the parents can be giving a safety list of what the kids should be watching out for, like don't get in people's cars or off of rides or anything? And the second thing is Election Day is coming up, and I think anyone out there who's listening, I think we should try to get them out there to vote. Even though the primary is over, it's still a very important thing to exercise your right to vote. You can't complain if you don't vote. I hear people complaining every day. They don't like this, they don't like that. Well, if they don't like what's going on, they should get out there and vote. V-O-T-E. It ain't that hard. If they want to learn what's going on in their city, they should come down here and learn about what's going on in city council. If they don't like what's going on in their city, they can always come down and speak up. You know, people do have a voice in Tacoma Park. The third thing is I think we should all remember, since we're not meeting next week, to turn your clocks back. You know, I think this is the weekend, next weekend, we turn the clocks back. It's always the last weekend of the month. So don't forget, you know, or else you'll really be spooked out when you wake up the next morning and wonder what happened. So don't forget to turn your clocks back. That includes the mayor, city council too, and the mayor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pat.
Don't forget.
In terms of your first question,
Yes.
there is a Halloween party on the Saturday before Halloween, and that, in response to the other parts of that question, I know if you know, does the police department have anything that's special that they're doing? I do know that in past Halloweens, the police department has sent extra officers out on the street, both to make sure that tricks don't get out of hand, and also to make sure that the young folks who are trick-or-treating are safer. I don't know, is that a plan this year?
Yeah, but I think they should have, like, going in groups where an adult is with them at all times, even if it's an undercover cop or whatever. An adult should be with them at all times. I worry about the kids around here with the gangs and the drugs and the nuts.
Sure.
Because you don't know what's going to happen. And once something happens, a kid can disappear. It only takes a second. And once it happens, it can be a tragedy that will last a lifetime or more.
Yes, of course, and I do see a number of young people trick-or-treating in my neighborhood, and almost in every case that I can think of, their parents are with them. So I think that's a fairly common precaution that parents do take.
Yeah.
But thank you for reminding
And
us. I
also,
appreciate it.
the candy should be checked out too, because you hear every year, somewhere in some city, there's always somebody who puts drugs in the candy, or razor blades, or nails, or whatever. And I think that there should be a place where the kids can have their candies checked out before they eat them. If that's a possibility, I think Tacoma Park would be great to see, where they could take them to the police station or the hospital or a nursing home or whatever, where a health professional can check the candy before the kid eats it, because once it's eaten, it's too late.
Sure, and I know another precaution that parents take is they take their children to trick-or-treat only at the homes of neighbors they know, which is another good precaution, too. Thank you,
But
Pat,
there's
for
always a
bringing
few
that to our
people who
attention.
don't.
Thank you, Pat.
Okay.
Anyone else? All right, seeing no one else, we'll move on to the next item, which is the city manager's comments.
I have a report at the end of the agenda, so I'll just touch on a few items under this section. I wanted to let the council know that I recently met with Jerry Stocks, the president of Washington Adventist Hospital. Kind of the discussion focused on two things. One was the hospital's pledge of $750,000 towards the gym. Mr. Stocks did provide me with a draft agreement, which I'll be reviewing with the city attorney's office. The proposed terms are very much in line with, I think, what the council is already familiar with, which is equal payments over a 5-year period. With the first payment basically remitted to the city 45 days after ground is actually broke for the facility. So we'll be looking at that with the city attorney's office. The second topic of our meeting basically dealt with the relocation plans for the hospital. Essentially, they are still in the process of trying to identify a site. As they have indicated before, the sites they are looking at are within 5 miles of the city limits, and those sites would be within Montgomery County. They have now added an additional filing period. If you recall, the certificate of need application process was only once a year. According to Mr. Stocks, the state has now added a second filing period for the certificate of need. One would presumably be earlier in the year, and the second probably in the fall. His thought at this time is that the hospital would most likely file in the fall of 2007. So really not too much more new information, but they are still kind of working on identifying a site and getting that under their control, since that is a prerequisite for filing the certificate of need. Probably on a more mundane setting is, I did want to let the council know, I had some discussions with the staff in response to some questions I've received about how we intend to decorate the community center for the holiday season. Maybe the end of October, but that's not too far off. What we had thought about doing, just wanted to see if the council had any other thoughts, is trying to keep it attractive but fairly simple in terms of probably stringing some lights along the facade of the building and probably accenting that with wreaths or something fairly simple. So if there's something else the council has in mind, please let me know. If not, my instruction to the Public Works Department at this point is to go ahead and proceed with getting some pricing in terms of those items. And obviously, we'd be including the library, in those plans.
I know that sort of traditionally we've put lights on the tree in front of the library. Is that?
Yeah, that's planned as well.
And I know that as a result of a request one year, we also placed a menorah out in front of the library for Hanukkah, obviously, not for Christmas.
Yeah, that is what has been traditionally done, and unless the council says otherwise, we weren't planning on changing that.
Okay.
I think the important question the public would ask is what color lights?
We were actually thinking white.
And you were going to talk about the decorations in the Old Town area? And the
Yeah, I think Councilmember Siemens had asked several weeks ago about the decorations in Old Town, and I think specifically the gazebo. My understanding is the gazebo is actually under the authority of Park and Planning, so we have traditionally not done anything there. We have basically provided some decorations on the light post, basically, in Old Town.
Have you been able to get a better reading on the gazebo, or have you talked with the county about?
I have not yet, but I'll be happy to do so, Councilmember Siemens.
Okay.
I know that's coming up very quickly with the
Right, and there
event
seems
in Old
to
Town.
be some confusion about what they would let us do or wouldn't let us to do, or not sure that they care what we put up for decorations. So.
Yeah, we can certainly explore that.
Because I think it would be good if we're going to have, try to assist the business community in making their event successful, that we could have some decorations. Thank you.
And if I can just add on the other lights, I don't know the cost comparison, but I know that they now have LED lights that are very long-lasting and cheap to run, but I don't know the initial cost.
Yeah, we'll check into that. So unless there's any questions the council has.
I have a couple. One is, I noticed there's a new door, maybe where the elevator is being planned. Can you give us an update on that, and also on Hefner's access?
In terms of the elevator, the cab is in the process of being manufactured. As I had mentioned, I think in a recent report, they do plan in the very near future to start preparing the actual shaft for the installation of the cab in terms of the electrical work and other things that are necessary. My guess would be that the actual cab installation will probably start towards the latter part of November, and the entire project is expected to be done by mid-December.
So that door might be a step towards...
Right.
Excellent.
In terms of Hefner, basically the remote card reader system is installed and was as of last Monday, probably a few days before that. But there were some issues, as you may recall, in terms of kind of getting the connection through Star Power, and that's been resolved.
My understanding, the outstanding issue last week was getting the associations to sign the proper agreements so they could get their keys.
Yeah, I think the three groups that the council had granted more than 11 free rentals, if you recall. It was the band, the singers, and another musical group. I'm sorry.
Is it the Ritchie Avenue Association? No, it's not that.
Yeah, there were three who were kind of more than the 11. The last direction that we had received from the council was that after they reached that 11, Basically, they were to kind of call in a week ahead of time so as not to preclude, other groups from using the facility. And if the space were available, then basically, they could use the facility, continue to use them free of charge. So basically, the Recreation Department, I believe, has still maintaining those contacts with those three groups.
They're expected to do that week by week?
It was after their first 11, Councilmember Austin Lane. That was a discussion that took place with the council
That's what we agreed to.
maybe a year or more ago. I'm kind of
I do remember the discussion. What I also remember was the recreation folks expressed some concern about that frequent interaction that would be required, and certainly for the groups involved, I don't think that they can go on a week-by-week basis.
Well, they did agree to it.
Yeah. And I think it's been working fine. I think generally they just call a week in advance, and basically as long as no one else has made arrangements, and truthfully probably generally during the week, which I believe is when most of the musical groups actually use it, unless perhaps one of the neighborhood associations, which I think they normally meet on a different night than Monday, if I recall. There hasn't been any conflict, but as I understand it, there's not been any disagreement or complaints from the group, as I think the mayor indicated.
Your staff is comfortable with that workload?
Yeah, it's been working okay. It's a limited number of groups, so it's not like it's very much of a hassle. And then basically, if the space is available, there's just a little, it's not a card, but it's a fob or whatever, and it's just basically programmed and to allow the groups access during that time period.
Anything else? Okay. Let's move on to the items on our regular meeting agenda. And the first one is a resolution regarding the Safe Routes to School application.
Hi, I'm David Sells. I'm the associate planner here. This resolution is to support the city's application for Safe Routes to School funds. It's a state grant that does not require matching funds. The purpose of the grant is to increase the number of children walking to school and for them to do so safely. And that's through educational programs and infrastructure projects. The council reviewed the grant components on September 18th. These components are the same except for a few changes. The paving of Boston Avenue sidewalk has been replaced with Grant Avenue sidewalk. Boston Avenue sidewalk will still be part of Public Works budget, but now we're looking at Grant Avenue remaining sidewalk for this grant. And
Can I ask a question about that?
sure.
Do you have a sense from talking with the people on Grant which side of the street it would go on, and whether the neighbors on that side of the street are comfortable, or is that more work that needs to be done?
That's still in the process.
Okay. Let me know if I can be helpful.
Sure. Thank you. Are there any other questions?
I remember when we discussed this, I had asked whether we could have some targeted police enforcement, traffic enforcement in the areas around the schools. And I notice it's not included here, and I presume that's because it's not necessarily a cost item. But has there been any consideration of that?
There has been consideration. Additional police enforcement was looked at, but it's a bit of a disproportionate cost compared to the other items in the grant application. What we're looking at is increasing the hours of the crossing guards and also giving crossing guards two-way radios by the middle school area. And that way, if there are any incidents, they'd be able to radio back to dispatch.
It wasn't my intention to get additional police, and I know that the police who are on patrol do some traffic enforcement. And it was more a suggestion that to the extent that they can do that traffic enforcement around the schools during school hours, that would be beneficial. As I said, I wasn't intending to suggest something that would actually cost money, as in putting on additional officers. But I know that they're out there anyway, and I know that they do some traffic enforcement. And I think that, given the concerns that there have been with the safety of children walking to and from school, and I think that those crossing guards are very important, and I'm glad you're doing that. But we have had occasional problems with speeding cars or cars not obeying pedestrian crosswalks or whatever. And it would be helpful, I think, if there were some police presence on an occasional basis that would, just to let people know that they're out there watching and that they should be extra cautious when children are arriving at school or leaving school. Does that sound feasible?
I'm not as familiar as Mr. Sills is with the parameters of the grant program. I know many grant programs look for things that are basically supplementing your existing services rather than finding a different funding mechanism for perhaps what we're currently doing. I don't know, David, is this something that is an eligible expense under the grant or not?
Well, actually, I wasn't even thinking of something that would necessarily be part of the grant funds.
Yeah.
I was thinking of our doing something to sort of supplement the efforts that are being made under the grant.
I think what we could merely do is just convey to the acting chief of police that this is a high priority for the council, and to, continue what they are doing and try to enhance that by, to the extent possible, just directing resources to certain locations around the schools during the hours when kids are traveling to and from.
Okay.
If that's acceptable.
I think that would be helpful.
Thank you, Mayor Porter. Yes, I would like to support Mayor Porter's suggestion that we do need to include some enforcement during the school hours or the times when the kids are going back and forth from school. I know in the good old days, they did some radar and LIDAR enforcement during those times in the school zones, and I haven't seen that for many years now. I wonder on I have several questions on the resolution or on the materials. You've got a split between infrastructure and non-infrastructure programs. Does the grant have requirements in there on what that split has to be percentage-wise or dollar-wise or anything?
The grant is being administered by State Highway, and it's a state grant. Well, actually, it's a federal grant. And federal regulations, or the federal structure of the grant, has a split between infrastructure and non-infrastructure for the entire state. So State Highway
Okay,
has
so in theory, you could
emphasized-
ask for all of one, and as
Right.
long as overall the state was in compliance,
Correct.
it would be okay. So there's a great deal of flexibility that we have with that. I notice in the non-infrastructure programs, you list a part-time coordinator. It doesn't say in here specifically what the coordinator's duties are going to be and responsibilities.
Yes.
And I have the same question for all of these. They don't show what the dollar amount is per item, which would make it a whole lot easier to evaluate.
The part-time coordinator, which is item number 3, would be coordinating projects item 4 through 8. So really the coordinator is for all non-infrastructure programs except for those involving the crossing guards.
Okay, and then there would be someone else doing evaluation of the project, which is a grant requirement.
Right, that's a big requirement in the grant, so that would be through somebody hired separately.
Okay, I sent in a request also. I didn't see in here. I don't know, was it considered the crosswalk suggestions that were made along Maple Avenue area?
Yes, they were considered, and we're still looking at improvements on Maple Avenue, especially the intersection of Maple Avenue and Sligo Creek Parkway, which is number 2 here on infrastructure projects.
Right, that's the sidewalk at the Parkway, but my suggestions were all at the other intersections this side of the Parkway, including at Lincoln Avenue, Sherman Avenue, Lee Avenue, and Grant Avenue. and I didn't see any of that mentioned in here. Was that considered, or did you see that request?
They were considered. The projects that are here came from a number of workshops that city staff held with PTA members and the participating schools in and around Tacoma Park. And so we took all the issues that they talked about, they found most important, and then we looked at what's feasible and what fits in with this grant application. That included a lot of Maple Avenue, and this is the result of it.
Yeah, I wonder how many of the PTA members actually are residents of this area around the school, the Piney Branch Elementary School, where the walkers are coming from the apartment buildings. Do we have any measure of participation in the PTA from different areas or neighborhoods? I guess what I'm saying is, I'm suggesting is that, you know, people coming from different directions would have different priorities. I think at the minimum, the you know, crosswalks are very important, especially right in front of the school, and at the we have the intersection at Grant Avenue and Maple Avenue, and also a crosswalk at Maple Avenue and Lee Avenue that are right adjacent to the school property. And right now we have no crosswalk at Lee Avenue, but yet there's a number of children that cross the street at that point every day in the morning and in the afternoon. And that seems like an important safety concern.
We'll take another look at it.
I appreciate that. Yeah, the problem, like I said, that I have with with these projects is that, you know, there's no dollar amounts tagged on to them to know, to be able to say that one looks like it's particularly more expensive than what the benefits might be. So it's hard to evaluate them individually like this. That's all. Thank you.
I would also encourage the traffic enforcement that the mayor suggests, so I'd appreciate any information you could provide us about that. I'm guessing that that's something, Barb? Yes. Okay, good. And is this a resolution we can put forward tonight?
Yes, we are planning to put it forward tonight.
I would be happy to move it.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and second. Is there any additional council comments on the resolution? Terry?
I would just say at this point, the resolution is basically supporting these projects, right?
Yes.
And my feeling is at this point, I'm not prepared to vote in the affirmative on this.
Okay. My understanding is that there's a time issue on this. Is that correct?
Yes, the grant application is due November 15th.
November the 15th?
Yes.
Okay. And so the concern is that if we did it like right before, I'm trying to think, our next meeting is November the 6th, that wouldn't give you enough time?
It's cutting it close.
Cutting it too close? Well, I would be inclined to go ahead and put it forward.
Can I just ask what the changes in the language would be that would satisfy your concerns, Councilmember Siemens?
I would like to see the crosswalk, better crosswalk markings, especially the ones directly adjacent to the Piney Branch Elementary School, included in this. I think it's an opportunity for, with the repaving that's going on of that section of Maple Avenue, it's an opportunity that we can install the thermoplast crosswalks that are highly visible and long-lasting.
Would you be satisfied if the only way to install that crosswalk was the painted instead of the thermoplast?
No, I think that's the issue, is that the painted ones on Maple Avenue, because of the amount of traffic, don't last long.
Sure.
And so it's
Can I suggest, under number 5, non-infrastructure, it says a mapping program with students to designate safe routes through the city, followed by signs and/or sidewalk markings. If maybe we could use that as a way of,
I think I may have an easier solution. The
Okay.
Director of Housing and Community Development was gesticulating, so I was trying to figure out. She just reminded me. As the council may recall, one of the CDBG projects about to get underway is some street work on Maple Avenue. It's my understanding from both Ms. Daines as well as Ms. Braithwaite, who just walked in, that the crosswalks that are of concern to Councilmember Siemens will actually be done as part of that project.
so it looks like it may be taken care of someplace else.
Aye.
All right. Is there any public comment on this proposed resolution? All right, seeing none. All those in favor of the resolution, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The resolution passes. The next item is the first reading of an ordinance with changes to the housing licensing program, and commercial occupancy licenses.
Move the ordinance.
And I looked through this and didn't see anything that was a problem, but I can't, it says that there's redlining, and at least it didn't show up in my version. So I can't tell which is new, which are the new things here. I can see the strikeouts, but I can't see the redlining. So you don't need to tell me what they all are. But before second reading, can we get one that has the instead of redlining, which appears to have gotten eaten by the transmission, maybe we can figure out a different way. Because as I said, I read it, I didn't see any problems with it. I don't think it's worth holding it up, but I would kind of like to know what the new language is as well as the strikeouts. So it's been moved. Was it seconded?
Second.
Okay. Are there any questions or comments from the council? We have talked about this, albeit briefly. Okay. Are there any public comments on this ordinance at first reading? All right, seeing none. This is the first reading of the ordinance. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ordinance passes at first reading. The next item is the second reading of an ordinance that corrects a previous residential parking area, number 5, to include an area that was left out by mistake on the New Hampshire Avenue Service Road. And I'm sure if Colleen were here, she would move it, but
I'll move it for her.
so somebody gets to do it.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any questions? Comments? Is there any public comments on this ordinance? All right, since this is the second reading, will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Porter,
Aye.
Councilmember Austin,
Aye.
Councilmember Clay, Councilmember Williams,
Aye.
Councilmember Seaman,
Aye.
Councilmember Elrich, Councilmember Barry.
Okay, this ordinance passes its second reading. The next item is a single reading ordinance on windows for the library. And I think this is for Public Works. Is that yours? Is there anything you wanted to tell? I've read the materials. It's fairly clear.
It's just a proposal to replace the original windows in the library, which are in many cases no longer functioning, no longer sealing completely, and installing instead an energy efficient window that will provide, in most cases, an inoperable window, so it'll be a weather-tight seal. What we requested were windows that sort of are the hallmark of energy efficient these days, the double thermal, argon gas-filled, E-coated windows that will serve both an energy-saving function but also assist with the library in terms of keeping it dry as well as reducing light that can cause damage to the contents of the library inside. We had probably half a dozen contractors come in and take a look at our facility and react to our proposals. 3 ended up bidding. and we're recommending that we go with a low bidder. It's a Tacoma Park company.
Okay, so that's good. Besides being a little bitter, we know where they live.
Right.
Okay. Terry?
I just had a question. It seems like we're kind of renovating the library piecemeal. We did the roof, or have we done the roof yet? Is that completed? Yeah, we did the roof. We've got, still have sandbags at the doors that need, when is that going to get resolved?
Well, it's a matter between the contractor and the city at this point.
Okay. And also the grade of the ground around the library and that back corner there, it flows water down to the library instead of away from it.
Yeah, the grading issue, Councilmember Siemens, is something that is on the punch list for James F. Knott Construction, the contractor for the first phase of the project. In regard to the stormwater concerns, I sent a letter last week, actually, to both the contractor and the architect, putting both parties on notice that there were some issues with the stormwater system, and basically those parties need to address it and figure it out. So at this point, we're not saying which party, whether we think it's a design issue or a construction issue, but that we do think there's problems with the drainage system near the library.
Okay. So I guess we don't need the windows to let the water out, so I guess this is a good plan. Thank you.
Move the ordinance.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any additional council comments, questions? Any public comments on this single reading ordinance? All right, seeing none, since this is a single reading ordinance, will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Copeland,
Aye.
Councilmember Austin
Aye.
Councilmember Clay, Councilmember Williams,
Aye.
Councilmember Seaman,
Aye.
Councilmember Eldridge, Councilmember Barron.
All right, the single reading ordinance passes. Then we have the second reading of an ordinance, Budget Amendment Number 2 for fiscal '07. And I see we've got one additional item. Did you want to just sort of explain what that was?
Yes. As the council may recall, 2 weeks ago, you authorized execution of a contract for the Carroll Avenue Streetscape Project Phase 2. As we discussed at that time, completion of the entire streetscape project would require the allocation of about $81,000 in city funds to supplement the $215,000 in community legacy grant monies. This ordinance has been amended since its first reading to basically reflect the allocation of those funds. And that's noted by the shaded sections or highlighted sections in the actual ordinance itself.
Okay. Does someone want to move this ordinance at second reading?
So move.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Are there any council questions or comments? Are there any public comments on this ordinance at second reading? All right, seeing none. Since this is the second reading, will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Porter,
Aye.
Councilmember Austin
Aye.
Councilmember Clay, Councilmember Williams,
Aye.
Councilmember Seaman,
Aye.
Councilmember Eldridge, Councilmember Barron.
Okay, the ordinance passes at second reading. We have in front of us the consent agenda. The consent agenda includes two resolutions, one providing an appointment to the Committee on the Environment and one providing an appointment, a reappointment to the Public Safety Citizens Advisory Committee. Does someone wish to move the consent agenda? Okay, it's been moved. Does someone want to second it?
Second.
All right. The consent agenda is not open to discussion. All those in favor of the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The consent agenda passes. We are running a little bit ahead of schedule at this point. Does the council want to take a break or move on to the first item in the work session agenda?
I would say since we have guests, we could go ahead and do their issue.
Okay, let's move on to the first item in the work session agenda, which is the discussion of the bus shelters. You can use the podium or you can sit on the table up front, whichever you're most comfortable with.
Sitting is, okay.
Okay?
You can bring your guest up too if you like.
Sure, absolutely.
Handout.
Okay. I've got it. Hold on.
Oh, look at that.
I'll give you one of these, so this is,
Oh, okay, here's a different one.
John Cisna is here from Signal Outdoor Advertising to discuss changes to the city's bus shelters. The city has a 10-year contract with Signal Outdoors for the bus shelters that started in 1999. The contract specifies 21 locations in the city, and any additional locations or other locations need to be approved by the city. Signal Outdoors is responsible for cleaning and repairing the shelters in the contract, and the design of the shelters must be approved by the city, and any changes. Mr. Cisna is here to present proposed changes to the shelter design, and we've also their locations at some locations. Design changes included metal mesh backing, and the photos I just passed out are an example of that metal mesh backing that I believe was installed on Friday at New Hampshire and Merwood in front of the rec center. So I'll let you take over.
Good evening.
Well, welcome.
As David said, my name is John Cisna. I'm the market manager, not newly appointed, but 2 years almost into my tender with Signal Outdoor Advertising. Previously, known as Culver Amherst, and there was an executive divorce at the top and different ownership control, which actually has turned out to be pretty terrific because there is a lot more money available for growth and expansion. We had not been in to meet with the council members, and Tacoma Park is as we say this to Peggy on a regular basis, we love Tacoma Park, and we enjoy the partnership that we have with bus shelters. Councilmember Siemens has a few things I know that he wants to discuss about maintenance, which obviously needs some work. But one of the reasons why I wanted to come in and meet with the council and the mayor was the proposal of the metal mesh, not on all of the locations, and even a few pilot locations if possible. We affectionately call some of these shelters our problem children because the glass is broken time and time and time and time again. We don't want to remove the shelter and relocate it somewhere else because the service of the shelter is still needed by the people that are utilizing. Even though in the contract it would allow for that, we would rather keep the shelter where it is and come up with a better way to make it safer in terms of the glass being broken and the cost involved in repairing it, which is fairly significant when it happens 3 and 4 and 5 different times in a 6-month period. So there are a number of different styles of backing. They're not an eyesore by any stretch of the imagination. They're quite attractive. There's an ornamental design. There's a flat design. They also discourage a little bit better the sticking of flyers. They don't adhere quite as well to this material as they do to the glass, which is a constant ongoing maintenance issue where we're removing the flyers on a regular basis, and then of course they're back up in the afternoon, which is understandable when people are trying to conduct their own little small businesses, but it's still not very appealing looking.
Okay, is that,
That's part of it, but
okay.
I wanted to see if there was any comments. I know that Councilmember Siemens has some issues on the maintenance, and I wanted to go there before I had another thing I'd like to add.
Okay, did you want to talk about it? Sounds
Sure.
like this is
I welcome the chance. I appreciate your coming tonight, and I'm glad that we had an opportunity to speak some before the meeting started. As you said, I've been concerned about the maintenance of the shelters. I'm going to talk very targeted in my neighborhood because that's where I'm most familiar with it, although I've just anecdotally seen situations outside of my neighborhood where your shelters also suffer some of the same problems that I see locally. But I'm going to just talk about here and basically the Maple Avenue corridor. And I'm going to probably repeat some of the things I mentioned to you before the meeting, but I think it's important to go on record that, in April of 2004, I got a complaint from a constituent who said that they had been trying for over a year to get the glass in the back of one of the shelters here right outside the building replaced because it had been broken out. And I then worked through our person here, Peggy Forrester, or whatever her name is now. She's changed again. Washington. That worked through her to try to get that glass replaced. And by November of 2004, some 7 months after I started, which was a year after the glass originally was broken, still had not seen any progress on that. And so I sent a letter to Mr. Culver himself in New York City. And then within a matter of a couple of weeks, it was replaced. But since then, most recently, there's a glass out in a bus shelter, I think it's 65, that is one of the large back panels has been broken out for, again, many months, approaching a year. It was in the late winter of 2005, 2006 that it was broken out, and it remains broken now. And your contract with the city stipulates that these bus shelters are going to be serviced on a regular basis. I think you said this evening that's a weekly basis. And one would wonder how someone services a bus shelter every week and doesn't notice the glass is broken out and does nothing about it. And so the contractual maintenance of these shelters is, I think, a real concern. And, you know, the trash that's around, I understand that comes and goes every day. But it's the replacement of the glass that's important. And I guess my first question for you is, you know, why do we call it a bus shelter? What are we sheltering people from?
Okay. Some of these locations that you're speaking of, there is an operational history that I have to check on. I'm not doubting that it took that long to get the glass repaired. I know that we've had to improve operationally the response time on glass replacement when shelters are struck by vehicles, having them removed quickly so there's not a safety issue, having the electrical power capped off so there's not an additional safety issue. However, the communication sometimes between the message that was supposed to come to our department, it just doesn't flow as well as it should, and that also is being corrected. So my request would be that everyone has easy access to either the office manager, Linda, or myself, and when there is something that is not been given proper maintenance, hopefully that's not going to occur in the future moving forward, that we are emailed notified so we can find out why there's a problem in getting the shelter maintained. That would be a quick way to take care of any additional glass that gets broken. It's also, it makes it a little bit, it helps me operationally to check out and make sure that the maintenance is being done. As we are operating not just Tacoma Park, but almost 300 other locations throughout the Maryland area. So there is it's the same problem does exist at times in Prince George's County as well, even as far north as Gaithersburg. So there's constant vandalism on some of these locations. The ones you're speaking of apparently were ignored. I don't know the reason. Councilmember Siemens, it's unacceptable, and moving forward it can't happen.
I can agree with you. It's unacceptable, and I can promise you I'm not going to become part of your reporting structure to let you know when these happen. I'm willing to do that for a time until you can get the processes in place in your own organization, but you know, your maintenance people should be the ones that are letting you know when maintenance is required.
There are 25 locations that we maintain in the city of Tacoma Park. Are these the three that, is there any other complaints coming in? I do know that we have a pretty good relationship with Peggy. There is communication with her on a regular basis, and we do respond rather quickly. Again, I don't know why these locations were ignored, but I think that other than these three, we have
the first case I mentioned with the bus shelter right outside the building here, you know, I worked on that pretty regularly through a number of months, 7 months, in corresponding through Peggy to your organization. and it was ignored. In this case, I decided to let it go and see how long it would just sit with nothing in it, because it's a little-used bus stop. And as it turns out, that approach didn't work either. Nothing happened with it. Again, I go back to the question of what are we sheltering people from? Because I look at your proposal to put a wire mesh in place of glass in the back, and I know that, as I told you before the meeting, many of my constituents rely on public transportation as their only means of getting around, going to work and going to the doctor's offices. And when I think of a shelter, I think of something that's going to keep the weather out, and that includes the rain, the snow, and the wind. Tonight, it's awful cold out there, and you stand waiting for a bus. It's nice to have something to shelter you from the elements and from the cold and the wind. And I don't see how a wire mesh is going to shelter you from either rain or from the wind. So I think the word shelter becomes more, it's an advertising kiosk, not a shelter.
Well, actually, until you have stood in one of the units that has the ornamental backing or the other style, it does cut the wind, it does cut the rain, actually more effectively than the glass, because the glass isn't totally sealed on the left or right. It's actually open on both sides to the design.
Not as far as open as on the left or right of the design that you handed me this evening.
Yeah, but there is a meshing that goes behind that's not very visible in the picture that actually cuts the wind. I've stood in plenty.
Look at this one. Did you get a copy?
Yeah, I got that one too.
So, as far as the units in question, again, I have to find out why those three in particular, either A, weren't reported back to operations and not repaired, what the reasons are, why they weren't repaired. Were they damaged so many times that the operations department decided not to repair them? That's what I have to find out. So there might be some there's some changes that we have to make there.
Can I add on to the maintenance aspect?
Yeah,
Pardon?
Can I add on to the maintenance aspect of this?
Well, let me just wrap up here with that part of it, and that is that these very well may have been vandalism, but lower income neighborhoods typically have a higher dependency on the public transportation, and that just as vandalism can happen in your neighborhood or my neighborhood, any neighborhood, 99% of the people in that neighborhood are not the vandals and shouldn't have to suffer because of the conditions created by those vandals. And I think it's important under the policing concept of broken windows concept that we quickly repair those things to try to improve the neighborhood and establish it as being a good neighborhood rather than leave the damage so that it looks like a run-down neighborhood, and more and more people view it as a good place to do vandalism.
The past weekend, which I mentioned to you prior to the meeting, we had 6 or 7 units that were hit in Tacoma Park, and they were severely damaged. 4 of them were repaired on Monday, and the others are being repaired this week. I do believe that we have improved vastly the response time, and it's very unfortunate that these 2 or 3 units you're speaking of has damaged our credibility, but moving forward, I can assure you that's going to be something that we're going to pay more attention to.
Okay, and I appreciate you're looking at alternatives that can maybe reduce the amount of vandalism or make it a little more difficult, but I'm not satisfied that your solution is the only or the best solution. I know that other bus companies such as Metrobus use a different type of glass that does not break, and I understand that you're looking at a cost-benefit ratio, but you're providing a service and asking us to let go of a service that was provided for us by the bus companies themselves, and we're benefiting with some money, some cash flow from you by allowing you to put these bus shelters in. But still, the primary goal of the bus shelter is to shelter the people who are riding the bus not to bring money into the city or to advertise for these companies.
No, we recognize, and your complaint is valid, and as I said, it's being taken very seriously, and I assure you it'll be addressed. One of the real needs for folks who are traveling each and every day without vehicles is a safe place to stand out of the rain or out of the snow. And, we don't want them being inconvenienced any further either. So we still would appreciate any help that can be given from the council in terms of if you see something that is awry, just somehow get it to us as quickly as you can, or to the city manager, and I'm sure we'll respond rapidly.
I guess pretty much what I wanted to say about maintenance, but I have some other questions, but if Austin may.
I'd love to just add to the maintenance issue. This isn't on Maple Avenue, and I can't say that the areas of my ward where I've gotten complaints about the bus shelters have been because of the substantial damage that Councilmember Siemens is talking about. But mainly the concerns I've heard expressed revolve around aesthetics. They just aren't satisfied that they're being kept as clean and tidy, and frankly, the very specific area is at Piney Branch and Philadelphia, where we have a middle school nearby, and there's persistent advertising of a scantily clad, very skinny woman, and this is just the BB advertising.
Like the one that's shown in the picture.
Right, and we've asked multiple times for that not to be done within that school zone, and within, I think the longest they were gone was 6 months, but usually that's the target audience, and I have not been pleased with that. The person who brought it to my attention, it was actually before Barb Matthews came on, but I think she has also brought it to our attention again in the last 2 years, and I would appreciate, I think your presence here is a step in the right direction, because you're listening to our concerns and you can take them back to the company, and this is new. I've been on the council for 5 years, and this is the first face-to-face contact we've had, and so I appreciate you coming to us. That really is very helpful, but what I would like to see, I understand that for cost reasons, you would like to replace the design of the shelter with this mesh, and I could consider approving that, but I would really like to have firm commitment from the company that you were going to comply with our other requests.
The advertising that goes up on the shelters, the actual approval still rests with you folks. In other words, if there is something that you feel is not appropriate, then obviously it will not be put there any longer. Some of this information is not new, but I have to have more of it flowing in my direction, and thank you for bringing that up, because it will be looked into. We have a lot of situations that are similar throughout the state of Maryland. There are alcohol restrictions. There are different types of advertisement that cannot even be put in with 100 yards of a school zone. So your message, I don't know why it didn't land on the right desk, but that was one of the reasons, aside from this, and I want to address something about which Councilmember Siemens and you have just brought up. It wasn't just because of cost of the, as a matter of fact, we can put Lexan panels in there, which are scratch resistant, not quite as strong as Kevlar, but just about. And we do not go that route is because of they get scratched and hazy. And if you look at some of the WMATA stops, they look far worse than having the maintenance of the glass being broken, because a Sharpie marker is virtually impossible to get off of the Lexan, which is actually less expensive than the glass, because it would last longer. The glass is far more attractive because obviously it's a polarized design. It's very expensive, And yes, in the long run, these would be less expensive for us if the shelter wasn't picked on as regularly. So we're just hoping that we could try this in a pilot way to see what the reaction might be from the council.
Well, just to be even more specific, I would like to see this council consider some limitations to the advertising that goes at these bus shelters. I think that our community is not one that wants to support many of the things that we see on the billboards. And while I'm not suggesting censorship, I think that the tone that it sets to have advertising there is a very important one to the community. I know that many people have been very pleased that Amano Clothing store is advertising at the bus shelter, because that is our homegrown business, and we're really proud of how well they've done for as long as they've been here. So there are many things that help us celebrate that community spirit, but there are other things that I think detract from it. And specifically on Maple Avenue, I've seen alcohol advertising that looks very blighted, if you ask me. It's not what I think is holding up a positive model for people. And
There's not supposed to be alcohol advertising. I believe our contract restricts alcohol,
no,
tobacco.
just tobacco. Just tobacco.
I thought we said alcohol initially.
Not in there.
It's not in there. And the other thing, you know, if we're going to go this route, I think we should think about violent imaging and provocative imaging. And I feel certain there are many things to advertise that are positive and fun and enjoyable, that don't involve breaking down communities or individuals. And so I'd really like to see this council take a bit more specific stand on these things, so that the company that is trying to carry out our policy will have a very clear idea of what we are asking of them.
Well, I think we can certainly discuss that. I would like to just add to what's previously been said, that I agree with Councilmember Siemens. I have real doubts about the feasibility of mesh providing much shelter. I would be willing to leave the mesh up in the one bus stop that you've got. It looks like it's the one next to the, is that the community center? Is that, I mean, the recreation center, that looks like the recreation center, and just sort of see. But it is, as somebody who uses the bus shelters at the Tacoma Metro, it's really important in the wintertime, because if there is air flowing through, they can get very cold, particularly in the evening. And I would think that there ought to be a way to protect the back of the shelter in such a way that it does cut the rain and it does cut the wind. So I would agree with Councilmember Siemens on that, and I'm not sure that the mesh is going to do it.
I will see if there's any other options that would be more appropriate than the mesh.
Okay. Right.
About
Did you have another issue, Jim?
Yes,
Are you
when you're
working
done
on
with
that? Are you working on the maintenance?
No,
still, or did you have
I-
another thing to bring up?
That's all right.
Okay, go ahead, Terry.
I just, since the question of the contract had come up, you know, one of the issues that I've had is really with our implementation of the contract, and it does say in the contract that if your company, I think it said Culver at the time, does not do the maintenance appropriately within 10 days, that then the city can do that maintenance and bill you. And yet, I don't think that has ever happened, and there have been times, at least the one time, where I brought the issue of the glass up with the city manager. And so I would like to know if that's just a window dressing conditions in this contract, or something that we'll actually willing to do. I'd like to, you know, both parties to agree there that it's a non-statement just in there to make people happy, or that we're both willing to stand by it and do it.
I don't think it was added for window dressing. Councilman Siemens, her department, the city manager, does get word to us rather quickly. I think they've been pretty terrific. And as I said earlier, it's unfortunate that some of these locations somehow got ignored. I don't know the reason, as I've stated, but I do know that it will change. And certainly, if we fall that far short, then it would be worth you guys having it fixed for safety reasons.
Now, in fairness to Ms. Matthews, this incident happened right at her beginning of employment with the city. But I just want to make sure that you're in agreement that we can, in fact, enforce that contract provision so that if we do have a similar situation arise, that we would, in fact, do the glass installation ourselves and bill the company.
I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that contractually the city has the right to do that. Obviously, my preference as a city manager would be that Mr. Cisna's firm would basically kind of fulfill its obligations maintenance-wise, because otherwise that obviously puts a tremendous burden on the public works staff. So,
No, I
but I
agree.
think if we have, I know the situation that you're talking about, I think that had been ongoing, and you were understandably frustrated about the time I started.
Right.
And I think certainly if we were to encounter that type of delay, Councilmember Siemens, the city should just move forward and do it on its own.
I appreciate that, and I would suggest that you bill them at a fee that recoups the money for Ms. Braithwaite so that her department doesn't suffer the damages that the company does. Just one last comment on the mesh. Is there maybe something that is not mesh, that's a solid panel, that's also attractive, but
I believe so. I was starting with this, and to see what, and as I stated, it did not have to be retrofitting all 25 locations. It was really more for the ones that continually get damaged, and it's the word hassle is unfair. It's a lot of additional work and cost, but at the same time, it's also a safety issue, because one of the things that we do very well is get the glass cleaned up immediately.
I agree with you. You do. I appreciate that the glass doesn't stay there for very long
And,
when it's broken.
I do know the history of other organizations who may not be so quick to respond to those safety issues. I don't know if they have the delay that we've experienced, but I do know that we take that very seriously. So there is a certain worry that someone who has, unfortunately been around a bus stop where the glass has just been broken, and they get cut and hurt, and the first folks they're calling upon, of course, is you guys.
That's why it's amazed me that the maintenance people didn't know the glass needed to be replaced.
The-
I stopped beating a dead horse. Just one last comment on the contract, and that is the provision that allows you to move the bus stop. I think is a ridiculous provision to have in the contract.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part.
I said I think the provision that's in the contract that allows you to relocate the bus stop to another location is a ridiculous.
And it's the reason why a number of these we haven't even made the effort to do so, because we know that there is a need at that particular site because it's high volume, and it's necessary for the folks who are using the metro to have a place to.
That's a transportation decision, not a let's say not a maintenance decision. It's not a
I think they
profit
can move
decision.
the shelter, not the bus stop.
That's right. He's not talking about moving the bus stop.
Yeah, the bus stop stays, but it just has no shelter on it.
WMATA is very easy to communicate with, and they will move a bus stop if there is a request made. I've had this experience a number of times, and they've never said no.
Right. I think it's a ridiculous provision to have in our contract, and I would like to see us strike it.
To let them move the shelters? you mean?
Right. The shelter or the bus stop.
Well, that's a business decision. I mean, I see
Right.
that if a company is losing money by maintaining a shelter, then they are inclined to walk away. I would prefer that all bus stops had shelters, because I think it gives that similar amount of
I think
insulation to people.
WMATA will provide the bus shelter if your organization doesn't.
Actually, at this particular time, they unless the county or the city is paying for that, it won't be done.
The county maintains the ones that are, the county has a relationship with Clear Channel to maintain the ones in the county, so.
And there's been a
WMATA
problem
would
with
not put them
maintenance.
in as a matter of course.
All I can say is that the bus stops are here to serve the people. It's not here to serve the corporations.
We're trying to fulfill all the contractual pieces. Apparently, we have some issues that we're going to fix, and we appreciate you bringing it to our attention.
Thank you.
Now, if Peggy Washington doesn't report to you that there's a maintenance issue, then are you
It sh-
going around inspecting on a regular basis?
It should be picked up, yes. As a matter of fact, it should be.
What is that schedule? Do you know?
Every Monday they are doing maintenance.
Once a week?
At least once a week, yes.
They're inspecting each?
They don't inspect every location, which seems to be part of the problem that I'm hearing about during this meeting.
But they are in town, and they could do
Correct.
that if they were directed.
Correct. It's it may take 4 hours sometimes to clean up 6 or 8 locations because of the amount of the glue, the tape, the flyers, the policing of all the different trash in the area that comes from a lot of people using the bus stop, which is something that we have to deal with today.
Okay, Bruce?
Yeah, if I can just remind everybody that the reason that we did this contract to begin with was that WMATA wasn't servicing their bus shelters very well,
Right.
and we felt we would get better maintenance, and I don't remember whether WMATA lit all of theirs, but I don't think they did, and so we were getting lighted shelters, and there were a number of reasons to do this, with the added benefit that there would be a little money for the city, but it wasn't mainly for the money, it was for the improved service. And it sounds like where we are is that we just may be in a position of both you and us wanting to make some revisions to how we, what our relationship is, and that it may therefore come down to wanting to amend the contract since it's not up until 2009. And therefore, there's an opportunity for us to maybe see about some further restrictions on things that go into the shelters, and for you to have the opportunity to change the what goes into them. And it just sounds like maybe with a little bit of back and forth with you and staff, and see how the maintenance improves, and see what other options there are for the backs of some of the shelters, and for us to maybe get you some information on what might be further restrictions that we might appreciate. See if you can accommodate that, then maybe we can amend the contract.
Well, our partnership can actually help in other ways as well. There are, one of the things you brought up about WMATA, they're getting out of the bus stop business. That is news on the street, but that has been coming from WMATA. They're cutting back. And we were looking to replace the WMATA shelters. There's a number of them that are in Tacoma Park that are old, and a new unit would certainly be in order, and we were looking to go that route as well. Another thing that was mentioned by Councilmember Williams during this meeting was the newspaper box that was blocking a sidewalk. We have a particular device that's called a newspaper rack, and it's used in other cities. It's quite attractive. It eliminates all those boxes cluttered in a pile, which can be an eyesore, and essentially gives one little compartment to each of these companies that do have these metal containers, which they attach to our shelters throughout Maryland, and it's a real task to have that removed, and I'm sure that has not been unnoticed by you folks. So there's some other things that we can add that would benefit the city in terms of appearance.
Yeah, get this working right, and then we could talk about those things.
Okay.
One of the things that the council might want to do in conjunction with some of the, with any additional discussions we want to have, is Montgomery County has recently done an inventory of all of its bus stops in great detail. And I know that there are some plans that the county has in terms of dealing with some of the issues that the inventory came up with, that they don't have the money to do everything. But I think it would be helpful to take a look at what the county is doing in conjunction with this additional discussion. So I would agree with Bruce. I think that there are 3 issues that we've raised. The maintenance is one. The issue of the materials on the back of the shelter is the other. And then the third one is whether we want to further restrict the type of advertising. And then you've brought another one up, which is the newspaper boxes. But I think it would also be worthwhile to get a briefing on the Montgomery County bus stop inventory. So we know, they inventoried every bus stop, those with shelters as well as those without. And I think it would be helpful to get some updated information on that and take a look at that also. They're also thinking about moving some of the bus stops, too.
That sounds good. I'm just hesitant to expand the business in Tacoma Park with this company until we see good performance on the business that you do have with us.
Your point is well noted, Councilmember Siemens. I do believe that much of the package we've completed and do a terrific job, frankly. But I can understand why you're concerned about the operation. But by and large, we have been very strong in the other categories.
If I can suggest that maybe we schedule to revisit this in a couple of months, 3 months, and see where things are.
I think that's an excellent idea from my point of view.
Since a couple of months would put us at the end of December, we don't have council meetings, then let's say January.
I wonder if we could also, I didn't see it in the cover sheet, maybe I didn't read it. I sometimes don't keep reading by the time I get to the bottom. I don't see the, in here, and I don't recall from budget time how much money we received for these stops being here.
I saw 6,000 somewhere.
Has that gone up over the years, or is that?
That's not information that I have looked at recently. I can report back to you on it.
It's budgeted at $6,000.
And I would reiterate Councilmember Williams' note that we were doing this to try and provide additional bus shelters, not so much for the money, although certainly the money is helpful. But if the money isn't enough to get us to continue on with something that's not working satisfactorily.
No, but I think you know, if it was $6,000 how many years ago when we started, we could at least revisit the remuneration and see whether it's should stay the same or change.
Sounds like you want to toss out the whole contract beforehand.
I think where we are right now is we want to revisit it again in January. I think 3 months is a good time frame. And we will look again. I hope we have got some additional information on maintenance at that point. You won't add any additional mesh backings other than that one until we've had a chance to sort of see how it works. I think taking it through the winter, through the fall and early winter should give us a sense of how well it's going to protect people. We should be thinking during that time of specifically how we can restrict advertising in public locations. And then we'll come back and take a look at that again in January. And I would also say that we do appreciate your coming here. There is some concern, I've heard it from other people, as Councilmember Siemens has, concern about maintenance. And we are looking forward to seeing an improvement in the maintenance. And hopefully when we come back in January, we can speak to improved maintenance and not have to deal with that one again.
I think the contract originally was worded in such a way that the maintenance was kind of wide open. And I'm not talking about the glass issue, but I'm talking about the amount of maintenance that was being applied by, at that time, Culver Amherst. And that may be an area that if there is to be modification of the contract, which hopefully will lead to a longer renewal with the city of Tacoma Park, then perhaps that was something that you guys should consider looking at in terms of the amount of days per week that, and 100% inspection of the sites on a weekly basis, so the glass is not missed.
Sounds reasonable.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We
Yes,
appreciate
thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We appreciate your being here. Thank you. We're going to take a very short break and come back to the next item on our agenda. speed humps. I've gone ahead and put it on the agenda for this week because I understand that Willow Avenue is in the process of being renovated, and we need to come to a conclusion on this sooner rather than later. So I want to see how far we can get this evening. Do you all want to come up to the table here so we can talk about this? We heard from you last week, Steve, about some of the concerns that you had. Daryl, have you had a chance to look into this and sort of get, is there any additional information you can give us?
Well, I think that the item you have in your council package kind of lays out the myriad of issues that we have before us with the issue of speed bumps and reinstalling speed bumps on a street when we're doing resurfacing, what is occurring now on Willow Avenue. Over the course of the last couple of years, the city's tried to define and identify a traffic calming choices that were comfortable for the city, understandable by the residents, and installable by city contractors. And I think we've made some progress towards that end, but it's apparent that we, have a ways more to go in terms of realizing the definitions and realizing the distinctions between the various traffic calming measures that can be put in. Basically, we have a city code that sets out certain parameters for traffic calming measures like speed humps. Our city code specifies that a speed hump can be between 3 and 4 inches. That's been in place for quite a while. I guess the last time that was reauthorized by the council. We also have a discussion from maybe as long as 2 years ago now where the city engineer endeavored to sort of define what the city standard speed bump was, and the council accepted that profile of the type of speed hump that we'd be installing in the future. We also had the situation that occurred on Maple Avenue where specific speed humps, there was a discussion and a lot of community participation about the speed humps on that street based on a previous understanding by the community of what was going to be happening on the roadway there, and then what actually did take place once the street was resurfaced. So I guess that's all by point of way of background. I think you have in your council item that these speed bumps were put in 1983. They're the original speed bumps, first speed bumps that were installed in Montgomery County. I got a chuckle out of the fact that a contractor installed them, and then apparently fairly short time after they were originally installed, they were reinstalled because the community felt like they weren't high enough. So if it's any consolation, that we've been dealing with this issue for over 20 years, and we're still working on it. So the speed bumps that were established back then in '83 were 5 inches and 6 inches. They were defined to be that on Willow Avenue. Of course, we all know since then, and one of the things we were trying to correct the past couple of years is that Pickett Street and the speed bump is different. So we were trying to establish consistency on speed bumps so that people knew what to expect when they approached a city speed bump, that you wouldn't have to drive differently over Willow Avenue than you would over Maple Avenue, than you would over Hickory Avenue, that there'd be an understanding on the part of the drivers what they were going to be anticipating based on what they were coming up to, as well as to make sure that the community understood what was going to be put in and what they were asking for. So this is sort of the conundrum we find ourselves in today. We're approaching a street. We've now resurfaced the street, and now's the time for reinstalling the speed bumps, and we have to decide with the community what works best for that street and what works best for the traffic calming there.
Did you have anything else you all would like to add?
Well, yeah, several things. It is interesting, the package. I want to thank the city, Barb, Public Works, and the others for putting together the package. I think part of it is the nature of certain streets. Willow Avenue is one. It's a long street. It gives people a long shot for getting from one point to another without having to go on other routes, especially during times of traffic. The streets are very attractive for people to go speeding. Even with the speed bumps that we had, people would speed up the hill, not just down the hill. And the original speed bumps that came out in '82 were one size, and around that time, it might have been before then, city police were clocking cars at 45 miles an hour, according to my neighbor, Ned Young. And then within a year, it was raised because there was a sense, whether it was just the neighbors or whether the radar units were out there, seeing that the units were not effective enough. Joy has mentioned, the people on the block might want to have a say in the design and the size. I think I can speak for my neighbors without having consulted them, that there is no love for one design versus another, for one height versus another. And if a speed calming device is 1 millimeter high, but it achieves the objective of controlling traffic speeds there without having to have law pulling people over, stopping in. I don't know that we've ever seen people pulled over on Willow Avenue for speeding, although we see speeding cars all the time on the street. This evening, a truck was off the street, making Public Works and neighbors scatter, but there's plenty of speeding there still. But truly, it is not one design over another, but having an appropriate calming device for the street that achieves the objective of making it safe both for people on the street, their children, but neighbors socialize. It's a narrow street, and it would be tragic, God forbid, that we have to be here talking about, if we had only done the right thing at this particular time, so-and-so wouldn't have been injured, so-and-so wouldn't have been killed. We all know the stories where stop signs and traffic lights, there's resistance by whatever authority in whatever place till somebody gets killed, then you get a light there.
Can I clarify what I did say?
Please.
You were asking the city council to do something that we don't have defined in our code. So for us to direct the city manager to do something, she really needs to know what it is she's being directed to do.
That's your foot, Steve. We have a very sensitive sound.
Yes, so. So what I was suggesting is that...
You sit back there.
What I was suggesting was that we have something that is satisfactory to Willow, which is what I'm assuming you're here advocating, defined in our code, and potential options are that the Tacoma Avenue speed table, which we have in the city limits, and the county Sligo Creek Parkway speed tables, or I'm not sure the right terminology, but those two options are not defined in our code, but they are things that people point to and say, you know, those are effective, that's what we want, and that was my suggestion, is adding to the definition so that if we did, as a council, decide to direct the city manager to do something other than the city standard speed bump, that she would know what we were asking.
As you say, Willow is quite a long street, and you only have 2 speed humps on it. And one of the things that strikes me is it may not so much be the way that the height of the speed hump or the shape of the speed hump as it is, maybe you simply don't have enough. One of the things that Public Works has brought to our attention in the past is the very abrupt speed humps may not be as effective as we would like, because since people have to slow down so much approaching the hump, they have to speed up after the hump, and as long as they're speeding up anyway, they might as well just keep going if they're intent to go too fast. And so perhaps a solution would be to use, you know, one of the standards that we've got, or like we did on the speed humps that we put in, what was that, on Prince George's? We put in the county standard speed hump, which is also a specified thing that we can define for our contractors. Put in something that we can specify and design, but perhaps put in more of them, so that there's not such a long stretch without speed humps. Now, I understand from the write-up in our packets that because of the way the law reads, when your speed humps were put in, it said 2 speed humps. It specified 2, it sounds like. And so there would have to be a process to get some more speed humps in, but it sounds like that would be something that might solve your problem.
And if
Well, it would certainly help, and that was what we actually submitted 2 petitions, and the second petition was specifically to add a speed bump in the lower section of the street, because that's where most of the real egregious speeding takes place. So that is something that we have requested.
And if I can just remind folks that the way the speed hump petitions have been done, pretty much, I'll say for a couple of years, have always been to make sure that they don't specify a number, but say speed humps in those blocks. That way, there's always an ability, without going through a process again, to say, well, you know, let's go back and add one more. It's like the need is identified, it happens, there's no additional petition or anything else.
But you guys came before that time.
But I don't remember with your second petition, whether do you specify add one?
Yes. It's right here.
What's helpful is to say add some, and then there's flexibility, in case 2 is the right number.
I think that the concern is that the petition for the additional speed hump doesn't meet the signatures, meet the requirement for signatures at least 2/3 of the household.
I thought it did.
Yeah, the
Had
additional
even more
one
than
does.
the other one.
Oh, I'm sorry, does meet the, okay, I'm just reading it too fast, sorry about that. Does meet the requirement.
The first, if you look at the attachment to the blue sheet, the first page is the
Yes.
one petition, and then the following 3 pages are the second petition.
Yep. I just read it too fast, sorry.
May I ask a question? Joy, about your comment about the 2 alternatives to the standard city code now, you're saying that the city needs a design. You need to be able to say to the contractors, this is the design to follow?
Well, we need to be able to say to the city manager, this is what the council intends for you to carry out, you know, implementing something that she can then do with integrity. And yes, it does need to point to a design.
So the design of the existing speed bumps, which the people on Willow Avenue really like, that's not a potential design for
It's not
replacement?
because the city passed this ordinance saying that the speed bumps would be between 3 and 4 inches. So it would have to be either called something different, right? It would have to be called something different. So we would have to say, we don't want speed bumps on Willow, we want speed table raised
A speed abatement
crosswalk
device.
things. Yeah, devices.
And you were going to go, but then I want to think of that.
Well, I just, several things. One, I want to say that, you know, the speed bumps on Maple Avenue that were installed from Philadelphia on up to the city line were the biggest speed bump that I've hit in my term on the council. I don't think a month goes by that I don't get complaints from my constituents about the speed bumps on that section of road. So I'm hesitant, real hesitant, to say that we need these real tall speed bumps. People, in fact, one of my constituents here tonight has back problems, and it is a severe problem to them in driving over those speed bumps, either riding with someone or riding on the buses. But I really appreciated the comments that you made that the real issue is get the cars to slow down, and how do we do that, and what are the traffic calming devices we can use, and whether it's 50 low humps or whatever the design is, or maybe it's a couple of chicanes in the road that would cause that to happen. I think we've got to look for something besides these super speed bumps to do it. I think we've got to be sensitive to the ADA requirements and also the needs of our fellow community members, and these super high speed bumps are a problem.
May I say that?
Sure.
Of course, we are very happy and glad that we have the curb work done, that we repave, but the city, of course, is doing this continually all the time. It does strike me that a methodical, well-designed evaluation of what exists, how effective what exists in certain types of streets, such as whether it's Maple Avenue, which is sort of an exception to the which is an exception to the rule, and certain other high-volume streets where there are traffic calming devices, it seems that with an unmarked car, not to alert people or whatever, to see how well different devices are working and what makes the most sense for city policy to achieve the objectives of having passive controls without having to have human police there pulling people over makes good sense. Both, of course, we care very much about Willow Avenue now, but for the long range for the city to have this type of perspective and knowledge and understanding so their policy achieves just what the city wants.
Very well said, and I agree with you wholly.
Yeah.
Well, can I also just add that we aren't doing this in a vacuum nor with our eyes closed. That kind of work has been done both by the city and before us by the Institute for Traffic Engineering, which has spent countless hours and thousands of dollars analyzing traffic calming. And you can access that information on the web in a flash, and our engineers have and our planners have. So I appreciate what you're saying, Steve, but we do know what the science says about speed bumps. We do have access to that information. The challenge in the city is that blending the science with people's perception of what is happening on their street, what is needed on their street, and what's unique about their street, all of which I understand on a personal level from going through this on my own street. So blending the science, which we know, and it's hardcore and it's real, with people's feeling about what they want on their street is where the challenge lies for the city in crafting its policy in a way that works for the broadest number of people that it can.
But traffic calming goes beyond speed humps, I think, and that's where
Yes.
we have fallen down. I don't think we do anything besides speed bumps, other than over there on Walnut we did.
Well, we certainly have. We run into community opposition when we raise issues for alternatives. So it's a learning process. It's something that the planning office and Public Works will continue to work with neighborhoods on. But we do have a tendency towards going towards the speed hump, both in a neighborhood level as well as in a staff response level.
I want to take a very short detour for a second just to say that in my own experience of seeing kind of what works best, what I always put forth to folks is the section of Bradley Lane between Brookville Road and Connecticut Avenue has either 3 or 4, I think very similar to our speed tables. They're the longer, flatter ones, and they're close enough together that it kind of, what it basically sets you up to do is to go 20. And you can maintain your 20 because you know you're going to hit one of them and it's not going to be too long before you get to it again, and it's really comfortable to go over it at 20. And I think that works. The thing that kind of goes with that is to remind people that in the state of Maryland, unless a street is posted at a speed lower than 30 miles an hour, the speed limit is 30 for any street. That's the minimum. So there has been talk, we've talked various times about, gee, are there streets that we might want to post at 25, at 20? My recollection of the conversation is that as soon as you start talking about posting below 20, it gets a little iffy. So I know that some of the people I've talked to who live on Willow say 5 miles an hour. You know, that's what we want people to slow down to. But that may not be the most effective speed because then, as somebody said previously, you speed up between them. One other person that we had talked to us about speed humps, and our speed humps in particular, was Dan Burden when he came through on the pedestrian safety stuff. And my recollection is that he said basically we had the worst speed humps he had ever seen, and was surprised that we still could have those or put them in like that or would want them like that, that they were just kind of way beyond the pale. And am I correct in remembering that the city standard speed bump that we put in the code was based on whoever the association is that comes up with these recommendations? I know that the Willow Avenue ordinance reference federal standards, and my assumption is that they're not necessarily federal standards, they're kind of industry standards, and that's kind of what we have?
Montgomery County's speed hump is actually more the industry standard. The smooth crest, 12 feet across, is generally considered the industry standard. The city standard is our own little hybrid that's a reflection and a reaction of people's interest in making people travel slower than 20 miles an hour, which the county standard is a 20-mile-an-hour bump. You do find a common thread among people who support speed bumps in the city. They do want 5-mile-an-hour speed bumps. They really would like to see, at least they think they would like to see the cars slow to 5 miles an hour to get across. So the city standard is a kind of blend of keeping in mind the height restrictions and issues of speed bumps and accessibility while trying to produce a profile that requires you to go a little slower than you can over a county crested speed bump.
So I guess I would just say that I think we do have a number of standards available to us. We've got the Montgomery County standard, we've got the city speed hump, and we've got the city speed table, which might be close to the county speed hump.
It's just got a flat top that's 10 feet across rather than a round top.
So we've kind of got 3 standards that we already know we can do. My final question is, Darrell, as we go in and get ready to resurface a street that has speed humps, I know that we give residents notification that this work is going to proceed. What in that notification addresses the replacement of speed humps?
Yeah, it generally hasn't had much language in our notices in the past about speed humps. It's usually a case-by-case situation where a street has speed bumps. We generally respond to people's questions that the speed humps are replaced within a few days of the resurfacing of the street. So we haven't spent a great deal of time or communication about the speed humps specifically.
Because it seems like it might be a good idea to say, you know, kind of, here's where we are with speed humps, here's where we are with speed hump replacement on streets. You know, if you have questions, contact, but that way it's not relying on people maybe kind of going, ooh, gee, what's about to happen? But a little bit more maybe discussion up front might be a little helpful.
Just a couple things. One, I think that we have a very short time period in which to resolve this, given that the street has been milled and now repaved. People's tolerance for discussion will soon end, and they will just want to see the speed bumps put back in so that traffic isn't going as fast as it can on a smooth road. The 2 things that I think that would be helpful for me if Darrell could come back to the council with information are the ADA aspects. I still don't have clarity about whether our Maple Avenue ones comply with any ADA requirements. And the second thing is we have the Tacoma Avenue speed table. It's not defined in our ordinance. My understanding is the ones that were taken out on Willow were 5 to 5.5 inches high, and that's much closer to the Tacoma Avenue speed table. Could we have more information about that design? I think there's also the Bradley Lane ones that Bruce brings up and the Sligo Creek Parkway ones, but it's possible that Tacoma Avenue speed table could be the only definition that we're missing. But I'd appreciate if you could come back to us with that. I really don't want this to get in depth in the council designing speed bumps. We all have flashbacks of Maple Avenue every so often. It's not pleasant.
They are not pretty.
And I have to say, during last year's election season, there were a lot of very serious issues before the city, but I still got a lot of complaints. A lot of the things that people brought up to me were the Maple Avenue speed bumps. So I would add that to the list of reasons not to go there in terms of things that we might do. If I understand where we are right now, Is it your suggestion, Joy, that we do another session on this?
Just one more, I think, will give the council enough information that we can make a decision as to whether we want to make an exception on Willow and how we will set this up for the future for other streets that are being repaved.
What I would like to suggest that we do is I would like to, can you send us a link to some of that? Is it written in English or in engineering? Can you
Yeah, no,
understand it?
there are some sites that are very user-friendly.
That would be helpful. I would like to see those. I would also like to see, I know that in our code, I remember, we've got a definition of a speed. We had a speed bump and a speed table, and I know when we came to the Prince George's Avenue stuff, you said that there is a specification for a county-style hump. Joy suggested a couple of other specifications that we could go to, and I don't know if you've got any specifications like for the county-style speed table as well as the thing that's, whatever you call it, on Tacoma Avenue. The very large hump that looks much more formidable than it actually turns out to be once you drive over it.
Tacoma Avenue is a construction that you don't find elsewhere. Again, we end up with these kind of unique situations. It doesn't match the county definition of a speed table, nor any engineer's definition of a speed table. It seems to have been created so that it keeps the level of the road surface at the curb height, so that it provides a very smooth way across for pedestrians right at curb height.
Because of the bike trail. So maybe it was designed to get bicycles across the street.
It's a kind of a unique situation. You don't see 6-inch traffic anythings in the engineering manuals.
So it wasn't really intended to slow down traffic. It was intended to give bicycles a way to
Well,
get
I think
across the
it
street
had multiple
safely.
uses, visibility being paramount, as well as slowing traffic and as well as providing a marked crossing.
Isn't it also where the street chokes down to
Yeah, it
maybe
gets
less than
narrow.
11
Yeah,
feet
you don't have the
lanes?
parks. Yeah, you don't have the parking spaces on either side.
Well, any information you can give us on sort of the standards of any of those traffic control devices in the roadway, as well as any thoughts you might have on the maintenance. I mean, Terry brings up another issue, which I know we've had complaints about, stormwater considerations on some of the humps, concern about them trapping stormwater.
Sure. The engineer has paid a very close
Which
eye on that.
could be a problem
since-
on a street with a slope.
Yeah. Because we don't put them in the gutter pan, you always have the ability of the water to run by the gutter pan. But again, it depends on the street. My own street's a perfect example. It's a pond behind the speed bump.
I have one other question for the neighborhood, and that is, would the neighborhood be willing to give up some parking spaces to use a different approach other than humps or tables? I think something like a chicane takes away some of the parking.
Do y'all have parking on your street?
Excuse me?
Do you have parking
We
on
do.
your street?
One side, I can tell you I was active with OTRA during the whole discussion of chicanes and all, and for Maple Avenue, there were these beautiful plans laid out several years ago by someone with the city, and there was no enthusiasm or interest to see them. I've not heard them. I can't speak for my neighbors, but
Right.
I can't think of any enthusiasm for that. I would like to say, however, that leaving it, of course, for you all to decide, it is a good thing, given that we have lived with speeding traffic, even with the humps, these many years, better than it was without the humps. But the level of interest will be that if the calming devices work, great, and we don't want to have to come back to you. But if they don't work, we're going to be coming and asking for help with unmarked studies that we'll assist in to be able to have real data what the speeding is like, because ultimately we don't want to have to come here reporting a tragedy.
Well, I don't want to say that I don't want to see you here again, but I hope that our solution is workable.
Can I ask a quick question? Bruce, do you have enough, I hope it's okay if I call you Bruce, Councilman Williams. Do you have enough information from us through our petition to the effect that we would like to see an additional one at the end of the street, or do we need to Do we need to
I think
do
the
that
only part of the
officially?
process that has to happen is that if you have a neighborhood association, it has to be discussed, and they need to tell us what they say.
Generally, to get additional speed humps placed, we need the petition, and then we need a comment from the neighborhood association. It helps if the comment is positive. But in those two, and then the process is there needs to be a public hearing, and there needs to be a two-reading ordinance. So we would have to go through that process. I don't know, how much longer is it before that we're going to be able to do paving?
The street is paved today.
Right, but I'm talking about in
Asphalt plant
terms of,
open.
doing additional asphalt work, like a third speed hump.
Oh, I mean, how long of a window do we have to do
Yeah.
that work? Until it gets cold, so I would say well
It's
through
cold
November.
tonight.
November?
Well, it has to be really cold, and the asphalt plants have to close down. But
Yeah.
we generally have well into November
Okay.
for paving. The speed hump itself will be done by our contractor, not his subcontractor, so we tend to have a little bit more control over getting that work done.
Isn't the OTRA meeting this Thursday?
It's not on the agenda.
I'm actually out of town, but if that's the next OTRA meeting, it would be helpful if you could get a statement from OTRA saying that there was no objection by the neighborhood association.
Because if you
It
don't,
shouldn't take
it
long.
won't happen this fall.
Okay,
That's right.
Okay.
You
I'd
need
like
it
to
now.
comment that maybe you've heard it from others, but that the work, the quality of the work with the curbs and the paving, we think it's terrific.
Oh, good.
Good.
Yeah. And also, I'd just like to add, this is my first time to attend a meeting like this. I'm very impressed with how the council deliberates on these things. This is, as a citizen education, this is very informative for me. Thank you very much for the time and the respect you've
Oh,
given us.
sure. Well, we're glad you came.
We do want to see you come back.
Just not Steve, right?
Watch out.
Okay, well, thank you. We'll, I think we could get it on, take a look for next week, but I think we can.
2 weeks.
I'm sorry, we're not meeting next week, so it would be 2 weeks. Thank you. Okay, Barb, you have your reports.
I was kidding.
Last item on the agenda.
Kidding, Councilmember Siemens, he's all packed up and ready to go, so I promise I'll make it quick. Obviously, you all can read through this, so I'm not going to read everything to you. What you may have noticed is that there is quite a bit of overlap between just sort of the general quarterly report on activities and programs and the update on the council priorities. As we talked about when the council adopted the priorities earlier this year, these 5 policy areas really have become sort of a major focus for staff's work. So you will see a lot of overlap. Just touch on maybe just a few items just in all these reports, and particularly in the update on programs and activities, because I know this is an issue that the council has always expressed some concern about, and that's traffic enforcement and pedestrian safety. And you had some discussion about that earlier this evening. During the quarter, and this is running from July 1st through September 30th, there were just over 1,000 traffic stops conducted by the police department during that quarter. That is up from about 620 done for the same period last year. So hopefully we're doing what the council would like us to do. Of those roughly 1,000 traffic stops, about 825 of those were cleared after the officer issued some type of citation. That has been a high emphasis for me during my tenure. I know this is something the council had talked to me about shortly after I started. Obviously, staffing somewhat plays a role in that, but I think the department has and continues to place a very high priority on doing traffic enforcement. During the quarter, a lot of the stops did take place on major roadways, and I listed some of those in the report. About 300 of those roughly 1,000 traffic stops were done on New Hampshire Avenue. There were about 170 done on Maple, 100 on Philadelphia, Carroll about 84, Piney Branch 80, Flower Avenue 58, and University Boulevard 54. So, you know, there is a lot of enforcement done on major roadways. Certainly we try to pay some attention to secondary roads as well. Before I move on to the financial report, are there any questions or comments the council just had about the general report?
I just wanted to thank you. There's a couple of items here that really jump out. One is the work that's been done on the gym feasibility study in terms of getting the contractor and getting the study started. And the other is the work that the staff did on the Tacoma Metro issue. I think on both of those, the staff has done a really fantastic job, and I hope you'll convey that to them, because I know that both of those items involved quite a lot of work.
Yeah, I will do that. Thank you very much.
I want to second that. I really do appreciate the detail with which you're reminding us of the many things that you and your staff have been busy with, and I think especially the Tacoma Metro development issue has been a very serious priority for the last few months, and I appreciate that. I think it is consistent with the council's policy we've established, and I hope that with continued attention over the next year that we can really make a difference there. I did want to get a little bit more information about the Safe Tacoma initiative. I see it's here on your list, and I know that you had additional conversations with Commander Burton. I want to make sure that this doesn't get off track. It's incredibly important to both the D.C. residents and Maryland residents that this be put in place as soon as possible. And what I saw from Commander Burton was a willingness to make it happen from their side, even if it meant reallocating resources. Can you say more about how much time you think that particular step is going to require?
I can share with you kind of what I know. After we had the meeting, Councilmember Austin Lane with the residents group, which I think was around the last week of September, more or less, I did schedule a follow-up meeting with Commander Burton, so that was probably roughly 10 days ago, to try to get an update on where they were, you know, with their funding dilemma, if you will. He's continuing to talk to his superiors about that, as you indicated. He's very, very interested in partnering with the city. I don't think there's any doubt that he personally, as well as the department, want to work cooperatively with the city. Obviously, he only has, you know, so much flexibility. What I asked him to do, and hope to get very soon, I did send him kind of an update or a check-in last week, is I told him this council's funding was, you know, contingent on kind of a firm partnership with the district. And since the $75,000, for whatever reason, was not earmarked in the police department's budget, what I thought this council would be looking for and what I owed you was something a little bit more definitive in terms of what resources he could allocate.
And what their value is?
I think if we have, I think not as much their value as far as if I have an idea of what that is. I know he is not in a position, from what he has indicated to me, that he's likely to be able to pull an existing staff person and say this is a designated person for this program. He has not indicated to me that he has that flexibility. What I've asked him to do is if he could allocate both the amount of man-hours by position that he could allocate to the program, and what type of functionality, if you will, that those employees could contribute. Certainly this council may want to have more discussion about this, but I think in terms of someone, if you will, making an in-kind contribution versus a monetary contribution, I don't know is inconsistent with what I see going on in the Tacoma-Langley CSAFE. The Prince George's County previously provided a grant to the city, and then we were responsible for hiring the organizer. We had approached them about having kind of a more long-term commitment, if you will, and the county executive's office had basically budgeted for a position in their police department to serve as that organizer, operating under the direction of Mary Kendall. So I think there is a model. I think the question that I have is if there's not a dedicated person you know, in the 4th District, who is that going to be, and how do those man-hours add up so we can make sure there is at least, you know, some type of comparable commitment. I know Commander Burton has agreed to provide some of the crime analysis function that I know Acting Chief Coursey feels is very important to the program. They certainly have a level of technological sophistication that we don't. But I guess what I wanted to make sure is it's not just sort of an in-spirit contribution, if you will, that it's something a little bit more definitive that I could bring back to this council, and that truthfully is within his power, if you will, or within his realm of authority to make that commitment. He's
Well,
indicated that he thinks that is doable and that Chief Ramsey could even sign off on that.
Okay. I would hate for that to take half the fiscal year. And what I heard in the meeting you and I both attended was he had 3 people he was designating to work on this. And the value of that probably exceeds $75,000. He had an analyst's time, he had a community organizer's time, and he had a captain's time. And with the expertise that those 3 people would bring to bear, our resources could be spent on that coordinator who did nothing but. To me, that seemed like they were bringing a lot to the table, and I would hate for us to get bogged down in initiating this program because we didn't have a piece of paper. He seemed to be very forthcoming with the resources. And if you want to make sure there's an agreement or that this is firm for the entire fiscal year, I can understand that, but I would really hate for this to delay things.
Yeah, certainly the intention is not to bog it down. This was a priority of this council. I would also add, though, that commitment of funding was also somewhat contingent, if you will, on a firm commitment by the district. I mean, I don't think, I know Councilmember Siemens had asked me this via email. I certainly don't think there was any intention to misrepresent the situation. I think there was probably just something got lost in the translation of their budget process. I think Commander Burton did mention a number of the positions. He's also been very clear with me, and I understand that I would be in the same position if I were him, that those individuals also have other responsibilities beyond this program. So he's not committing those 3 people. I think if those 3 people were full-time, or truthfully even one staff person was full-time, that would certainly exceed the likely value.
Is it fair to say that the situation DC has is that a committee earmarked $75,000 of the existing police budget for the Safe Tacoma initiative?
That's my understanding. I don't think that Commander
So
Burton...
it is earmarked?
No. My understanding, and I don't honestly know that Commander Burton or Chief Ramsey really knows exactly what happened. They were not involved, and he stated this in terms of what those discussions were as the D.C. budget made its way through the process.
I was. So what I remember Councilmember Fenty proposing is the earmarking of $75,000 for the Safe Tacoma initiative. What did not happen was no additional money was put in the police budget for that. And so what it meant was that out of the amount that was in the police budget, $75,000 of it had to be spent on the Safe Tacoma initiative.
As I understand, I don't pretend to understand all the...
I'd be happy to get the legislative language if that would be
nuances.
useful.
From what Commander Burton has indicated is in the absence of any additional funding or earmarked funding in the police department budget, what that would mean, practically speaking, is a diversion of resources that previously had gone to other programs, and apparently there is some type of issue in terms of what the legislative branch in the D.C. governmental structure can dictate to the executive branch and how those priorities are set forth. That's what he's explained to me. And so there's apparently some issue internally for D.C. to work out. I mean, I think the important thing is that he is very interested, and Chief Ramsey is very interested in trying to formalize this partnership and moving forward. I mean, if this council feels differently and you would like me to move forward in the absence of getting that information from Commander Burton, that's certainly the council's prerogative. Obviously, this is a somewhat a different situation than I think all of us anticipated back in May and June, I think, when the council was finalizing its budget.
Is this something you could follow up with, Councilmember Austin Lane?
The issue is trying to get anything from D.C. of a legal nature will take a very long time. So if you want to see something in writing, we will be waiting a very long time. If we want to go forward with what we have in the way of D.C. resources, we do have, I'd be happy to bring the legislation to you that went through the Judiciary Committee so that this council could be assured that the legislature did match our money.
What I had asked Commander Burton for, and certainly having worked in the past in very large governments, or I think Councilmember Austin Lane is right, there is a lot of bureaucracy. I was not looking for, from Commander Burton or from Chief Ramsey, some 20-page legal document. What I merely asked for is for them to reduce that commitment to writing, and so that there was a clear understanding by all parties of what financial resources they were committing. He indicated that would not be a difficult matter, and that was something that Chief Ramsey could probably just reduce to writing and send to me. From my perspective, that's sufficient. Like I say, if this council would like to move forward in the absence of that type of commitment, that's certainly the council's prerogative.
Did he give you an estimate of how long that would take?
We had met approximately 2 weeks ago. I sent him kind of a follow-up email last week just asking where he was kind of at in that process. I've not had a response. If I don't get one in the next day or so, certainly just follow up with a phone call. I don't think it's an indication of a lack of interest or unwillingness. I'm sure it's just a matter of having a lot on his plate and needing to get to those in a higher position. His indication was that in terms of how resources within his command are deployed, that's really a matter for him to discuss with Chief Ramsey, and it doesn't go beyond that, and that he felt comfortable being able to make that commitment without having to go outside the police department and get it blessed by anyone else.
Okay. Well, that's reassuring, because if it did have to go to legal or beyond, I'm afraid it would be a very long time.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor Porter. I'd just like to run through real quick. I know it's getting late, but I did want to mention a couple things from the report, and also things that aren't in the report. One thing is on the communications. Well, let's go back administrative. I do want to second Councilmember Austin Lane's thank you for the preparatory work that was done on the WMATA issue. I think it was excellent. It was, as I mentioned before, it was very well organized. I think we had, it was obviously a lot of work put into it, but we had the information that we needed in a timely fashion. I appreciate that. Communications, I'm just continually impressed with the work that comes out of the cable TV. I really appreciate it. I also wanted to mention the website, that I think the changes that were made to the website some months ago are nice appearing. I didn't think it was the end of what's needed, and so I look forward to more work being done there, and I look forward to having updates done more regularly. I noticed that the phone number list still lags, and it's getting updated. In the housing area, I wanted to thank Sarah Dames for the work that she has done on helping the tenants at the Park Ritchie Apartments and the is it Maple View Apartments, at 7667 Maple, in trying to get their tenant associations formed. And I would like to ask if, rather than be reactive, we could look at some of the other buildings where people feel that tenant organizations are needed, and see if we can provide some assistance to the tenants at, I know specifically the Edinburgh House, right across the street here at 7511, is interested in forming a tenant association, and there was some interest expressed at the Franklin Apartments at 7620 Maple Avenue. If we could talk about how we can provide some assistance to them, it'd be helpful. And again, I appreciate the work that was put into this year's CDBG program, and we had, I think, a good number of applicants this year for that grant program, and that was refreshing to see. That's something where we've had to beg for grant applications in the past, and so it was good to see that the outreach was done to get the applications in. The library is always a highlight. I would like to compliment Phil Shapiro and the work that he's doing in the computer laboratory over there. And that might be biased since I do have a computer background, but he has just done excellent. He's really been a help to individuals in the community, not just with the programs that he has, but he's gone the extra mile, even put in some extra hours to help such people as Pat Lovelace here to become wired, even though he is blind. I also with the police department. I'm curious on what the schedule is for selecting a new police chief.
The application deadline is the close of business on Friday, November 3rd. I'll be meeting with Mr. Mercer, who, as the council is aware, is the head of the executive search firm that we retain, the Mercer Group, probably about 10 days thereafter to kind of go through the preliminary list. He and I will kind of cut that down. We'll then start background checks. My hope is to be interviewing probably the last week of November, following the Thanksgiving holiday.
I would just like to add again, as you know, we're all interested in the qualifications of the individual that you're going to end up hiring. And I know that I personally have stressed the importance of the managerial background, but I did want to mention that I'm not so interested in someone that had a high position in an organization and didn't have the hands-on experience, because we are a small department. I think the chief does have to have intimate knowledge with, you know, the low-level activities that go on in the police department. And then lastly, I'll just mention the recreation department. I think that they've done an excellent job, and it's not just over the last quarter, but since the community center has opened, it's really great to see the number of people using the community center and the various programs that come along, and I think it's a real tribute to the staff in the recreation department, and I thank you for that.
No, thank you very much for those comments, Councilmember Siemens. One of the things as I work on this report every quarter that really strikes me, and I mean this sincerely, is how very fortunate I am to have the staff that I do. When I started here, I remember meeting with the management team, and one of the comments I made at that time, and I think I live it every day, is that really what makes or breaks any city manager is the staff that he or she has. And I have the privilege once a quarter to basically kind of come before you and highlight some of the activities, you know, and really it's just a credit to the work that the staff does every single day. And certainly after sitting here getting their reports and typing it in, I feel exhausted, as I'm sure they do. A couple of things, if I may, just very quickly, that Councilmember Siemens touched on was the work done by many of the city departments, but certainly the communications staff. And one of the things that's noted in here is that there is a Hometown Video Festival that we participate in every single year. I know last year we received, I think it was an award. This year we received 2 awards. One was for overall excellence in government access. The other was for a particular snapshot segment called Going to the Dogs, which was kind of about the COPS program and the K-9. And we also did receive a special recognition from the TOA, basically an honorable mention for our website and some of the work that we have done. Certainly I would agree with Councilmember Siemens. There's always room for improvement, and we'll continue doing that. I will follow up with Sarah Daines, Councilmember Siemens, on your thought about going ahead and maybe being proactive in terms of forming some of the tenants associations rather than when there's an issue kind of looming down upon them. And would echo your comments about Phil Shapiro. It's not just a job for him, it's very much a labor of love. I know when he and I were talking once, he was, if he kind of finds people who are getting new computers or whatever, he meets folks throughout his day-to-day work, families, seniors, many individuals who can't afford a computer. When my husband and I bought a new one, I gave him our old one, and I think he had an elderly lady that he had met in the senior room who didn't have one. And so
yes,
he took ours on, refurbished it, and gave it to her.
Yeah, and I would like to use this opportunity with our viewing audience. I'm sure they're still watching at 10:15 this evening.
I'm sure they are.
That Phil Shapiro can find homes for the old computers that you're replacing. And so if anyone has an old computer that they would like to see go on to a new life, you know, certainly encourage them to contact Phil and see if he doesn't have someone who needs one.
And I think just the last thing is certainly with the community center as the project as a whole, I know it's been, at times probably very frustrating for all of us who sit on the dais, and a lot of ups and downs, you know, just during the construction, some issues which we're still dealing with. But when you have the opportunity, as I do, to walk through the computer learning center, you know, during the morning hours, and you see all the rooms filled up and so many seniors participating in the program, or you're here after school, you know, watching kids do arts activities. It's really what this project was all about. And I think after we've all suffered through many years of the pain kind of getting the project built, it's really nice to see it become what we had all hoped it to be.
Yeah.
So, if there's no other comments just about the report, just very quickly, since it is getting a little bit late, there is the quarterly financial report included in your agenda packet. Truthfully, I want to make sure that you have periodic financial information, but the first quarter really doesn't tell you a whole lot. It's pretty early to really be seeing any trends. There were a couple revenue sources that I noted. If you compare it to the same time period last year, that were a little bit down, and talking to Ms. Brooks about it, it just seems to be a matter of timing, nothing really to be concerned about. The major difference in terms of expenditures from this year to last year, expenditures were actually somewhat down compared to last year. Most of that was really attributable to capital expenditures. We were going gangbusters last year, basically doing a lot of street work, and a lot of the work was done in fiscal '06. And so that's really the major difference that you see. But if there's any questions about the financial report, I'd be happy to answer them, but really nothing too exciting this time of year.
I was trying to remember. First quarter ends September 30th, and I thought that the first real property tax payment had to be made in September. Is that right?
It does. It has to be made by September 30th, and so a lot of the receipts start coming in after that. So what you see in front of you is basically receipts as of September 30th, actual collections.
So that it comes into
the county, and then gets remitted.
So we don't count it until
Correct.
it actually comes in here.
Right. It's actually when we actually physically receive the funds.
Okay.
So, other than that, just the thing that we had kind of talked about as we were going through the establishment of the council priorities, it's just so the council had some sense of how we were doing. Wanted to make sure there was a mechanism to kind of report back to you on the work plan, if you will, and the activities associated with that. I think a lot of the affordable housing items were actually covered by Linda Walker last week. Certainly, I think the community center, the council's pretty familiar with, and I think the major activities.
Can I just ask one thing about the community center?
Sure.
I know we were trying to get a county supplemental.
Yes.
Is there any progress towards that?
The mayor had sent a letter to the county executive late last week. I will be following up this week with the staff to find out exactly how that's going to start moving through their process, so the council kind of has a sense of when you need to start contacting people. But yeah, the request has gone in.
Good.
And should say that the city manager drafted, and Bruce and I worked on the letter to the county administrator.
So that should be in this next
county.
quarter?
Yeah, it should be in the next quarter. It just went out. I believe Peggy did make a copy of that letter as well as the attachment. It should have been in your mailbox. If it wasn't, for some reason, I'll find out why, because I know I'd ask her to make copies.
In this packet?
It should be in this weekend's package.
Yeah, this weekend.
No,
It
I
was
didn't
not.
see it in this one, but.
Yeah, what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and.
I think it went out.
Letter was went out on Tuesday is when you were in and signed it, so it went out Tuesday afternoon. And Peggy was going to make copies. If for some reason it's not in your packet, it's just easy enough just to make another copy of that for you. So it's not, okay, I'll follow up on that.
Okay, thanks.
Like I say, certainly, given the lateness of the hour, don't want to repeat everything. If you have any questions about any of the items, I'll be happy to answer them. I think one of the things this quarter, especially after the elections, that will become critical is on all these areas, is making contact with our new elected officials, particularly at the county level for some of the projects that we're trying to work with, and we'll be looking to each of you for the areas that you so kindly volunteered and be asking you to make those contacts.
Yeah, we got to make sure we get in touch with that Mark Elrich.
Yes.
Well, I've talked to Councilmember Barry. I think that we should plan on, assuming Valerie Irvin is elected as our District 5 county council member, we should plan on giving her the same tour that we gave. I've spoken to her about it, and she's expressed a real interest in seeing some of that, and I think it would be worthwhile, spending the time and giving her the tour. She is very supportive of the kinds of things we're trying to do, and she will be in a good position, both because of her elected office and also because of her experience previously in the county council, to be helpful. And I think giving her a sense of, what we're trying to do with that economic development would be very helpful.
Yeah, the staff has talked about that as well, and certainly not only from Ms. Irvin, but also some of the state officials. As you remember, some of the action plans, particularly for the New Hampshire Avenue corridor, Also involved the possibility of getting some state funding and having SHA address certain issues of concern. So what we thought we would do is after the elections is just schedule another tour, invite some of the new elected officials at all levels, and also try to get some of the folks from Prince George's County who, due to scheduling conflicts, were unable to join us last time. In talking to the staff in the county executive's office, one of the things that we will probably go ahead and do with those items the council has already identified is go ahead and get some documentation over to the staff about those requests, since there will be a new county executive. The timing's a little awkward with their budget, but we'd like to go ahead and make the staff at least aware of what the city's requests are for the FY08 county budget. Their plan at this point is basically to analyze those, ask for any additional information that they feel that they need, and then truthfully it'll probably sort of be set aside until after the election so that they can discuss those issues with the new county executive.
And will that be where you bring up tax duplication issues, or
Yes. One of the things
other gym requests?
Well, we're hoping the gym request, we've actually asked that it be handled as a supplemental, and I think so that the council can kind of deal with the issue of once you have the completion of the feasibility study and that information is made available, obviously that sort of leaves the council in the position of trying to determine where we're at with the likely cost of the gym and what type of funding is in hand. Part of what we put in the letter that went to the county executive is that we were asking for it to be addressed as a supplemental so that this council had an idea by the end of this calendar year what funding was actually in hand and what gap, if any, existed, so that you have the information that you need to make certain decisions about any funding for a gym and how to proceed. So hopefully they'll be able to accommodate that request. A lot of the other items will probably need to be addressed as part of the county's FY08 budget from a practical standpoint. Any questions from anyone? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and if there's nothing else, we're adjourned for 2 weeks, coming back in 2 weeks. And I should have said, I slipped my mind at the beginning.
Late meeting's over.
Councilmember Barry did notify me that he was going to be out of town this week and he would not be here for this council meeting, so apologies. Councilmember Clay is the other.